when my three older sisters kicked our 65-year-old mother out of the house she'd lived in for 40 years. They had no idea I was about to make their lives a living hell. The eviction happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I arrived at Mom's house to find Brielle, Celeste, and Felicity loading her belongings into garbage bags, while a real estate agent took photos of the empty rooms. "Isabelle, you're just in time," Brielle said, with the fake smile she'd perfected as a pharmaceutical sales rep. "We're helping Mom transition to her new assisted living facility." That was the moment I realized my sisters had become strangers I no longer recognized. Our mother, Vivian, sat on the front porch in her favorite rocking chair, the only piece of furniture they'd allowed her to keep. At 65, she was sharp as a tack, physically healthy, and completely capable of living independently. The assisted living facility was a lie they'd told themselves to justify what they were really doing, stealing her home to cash in on 40 years of property appreciation. "Mom, what's happening?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "They say it's for my own good," she said quietly, staring at the house where she'd raised 4 daughters and buried one husband. "They say I'm too old to manage a house this big." But I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly what this was about. "My name is Isabelle Wright. I'm 35 years old, and I'm a social worker who specializes in elder abuse cases. I've seen this scenario dozens of times. Adult children who convince themselves that stealing their parents' assets is actually an act of love and protection. If you've ever watched someone you love be betrayed by their own family, you know the rage I felt sitting on that porch. If you've ever seen elder abuse disguised as concern, you'll understand why I couldn't let this stand. Hit that like button if you believe justice should be served when family members prey on the vulnerable, and subscribe because this story is about what happens when someone finally fights back." The house was worth $800,000 now, thanks to the gentrification of our neighborhood. Mom had bought it for $45,000 in 1983 with the life insurance money from Dad's death. She'd raised us there, paid it off with her teacher's salary, and turned it into the kind of home that made all our friends wish they lived there too. What my sisters didn't know was that I had been documenting their manipulation campaign for 6 months. For half a year, I'd watched them chip away at Mom's confidence. Brielle would mention how difficult it was becoming to maintain such a large house. Celeste would express concern about Mom's isolation and suggest she'd be happier around people her own age. Felicity would bring up home invasions in the area and worry about Mom's safety living alone. None of it was genuine concern. All of it was designed to make Mom doubt her ability to live independently so they could justify taking control of her most valuable asset. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the youngest sister who'd spent her entire career learning how to protect vulnerable adults from exactly this kind of exploitation. As I watched my mother's life being packed into trash bags, I made a promise to her and to myself. My sisters thought they were clever. They thought they'd gotten away with elder abuse because they'd wrapped it in concern and family love. They were about to learn that family loyalty works both ways. And when someone hurts my mother, I don't just get even, I get justice. Before I tell you about the war I declared on my own sisters, let me tell you who they were dealing with. They had no idea they'd just made an enemy of someone who destroys elder abusers for a living. I'm Isabelle Wright, and for the past 12 years, I've worked as a social worker for the Department of Aging Services. My job is to investigate reports of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and neglect. I've seen every trick in the book, every manipulation tactic, every way that adult children justify stealing from their parents. I know how to document abuse. I know how to build cases. I know how to gather evidence that holds up in court. Most importantly, I know how to make abusers face consequences for their actions. My sisters had just committed elder abuse against someone whose daughter makes a living prosecuting people exactly like them. I became passionate about elder rights because of our family history. Dad died when I was 8 years old, leaving Mom to raise 4 daughters on a teacher's salary. She worked 2 jobs to keep us in our house, sacrificed her own dreams to pay for our educations, and never once made us feel like we were a burden. Mom taught high school English for 37 years. She was the teacher students remembered decades later, the one who made Shakespeare accessible and helped struggling kids find their voices through writing. She retired with a modest pension and the satisfaction of knowing she'd made a difference in thousands of young lives. But my 3 older sisters seem to have forgotten all of that. Brielle, 42, works in pharmaceutical sales and makes 6 figures pushing prescription drugs to doctors. She's divorced, childless, and spends her money on luxury vacations and designer everything. She's also the sister who convinced the others that Mom's house was wasted on one person. Celeste, 40, is a real estate agent who's been eyeing Mom's property value for years. She's married to a contractor, has 2 teenage kids, and lives in a McMansion that's mortgaged to the hilt. She's the one who found the assisted living facility and handled the paperwork to get Mom declared unable to manage her affairs. Felicity, 38, is a marketing executive who specializes in crisis management for corporations. She's the strategist of the family, the one who developed the manipulation campaign and coached the others on how to present their concerns as loving worry rather than greed. They'd forgotten that I learned my investigative skills by watching the best elder abuse detective in the state. All 3 of them make more money than Mom ever did, but somehow they'd convinced themselves that they deserved her life savings more than she did. They'd rationalized that Mom was sitting on valuable assets that could be put to better use, funding their lifestyles. What they didn't understand was that elder abuse isn't just illegal, it's personal for me. I'd spent years watching families destroy themselves over inheritance money. I'd seen adult children who turned into predators the moment they smelled their parents' vulnerability. I'd testified in court against people who'd stolen their mothers' homes, emptied their fathers' bank accounts, and convinced elderly parents to sign over power of attorney under false pretenses. But I'd never imagined I'd have to protect my own mother from my own sisters. The assisted living facility they'd chosen was actually a low-income senior housing complex 40 minutes away from our neighborhood. The monthly fee would eat up most of Mom's Social Security and pension, leaving her with barely enough for food and medication. The room was the size of a studio apartment, with no space for her books, her piano, or any of the belongings that made her feel at home. They'd told her it was temporary, just until they could figure out the best long-term solution for everyone. But I'd seen the real estate listing they'd already prepared. The house would be on the market within a week. The 3-way split of the proceeds would give each of them about $200,000 after taxes and fees, money they planned to use for home renovations, vacation properties, and college funds. Money that belonged to our mother, who'd worked for 40 years to earn the right to live in her own home. That Tuesday evening, after I'd helped Mom settle into her new temporary housing, I went home to my own apartment and opened a new case file on my laptop. But this wasn't a case I'd be turning over to law enforcement or adult protective services. This was a case I'd be handling personally. I had access to public records, financial databases, and professional networks that my sisters couldn't imagine. I knew their social security numbers, their employment histories, their financial vulnerabilities, and their deepest professional insecurities. Most importantly, I knew that the best way to destroy someone's life isn't through violence or illegal activity. It's through consequences. Legal, ethical, professionally devastating consequences that expose people for who they really are. My sisters thought they'd gotten away with elder abuse. They were about to discover that justice sometimes comes from the person they'd least expect. Their own baby sister. My campaign against my sisters began the next morning with a simple phone call to Brielle's employer. I started with the sister I knew would crack under pressure first. Hi, this is Isabelle Wright from the Department of Aging Services, I said, when the pharmaceutical company's HR department answered. I need to report a potential ethics violation involving one of your sales representatives. What kind of violation? The HR manager asked. Financial elder abuse? We have documentation that Brielle Morrison has been manipulating her elderly mother into signing over property rights under false pretenses. Given that your company requires ethical conduct from employees who interact with vulnerable populations like elderly patients, I thought you should be aware. The beauty of working in elder services is that everyone takes your calls seriously. I knew Brielle's company had strict policies about employee conduct, especially regarding vulnerable populations. Pharmaceutical sales reps who abuse elderly family members create liability issues for companies that market drugs to seniors. Within hours, Brielle was called into HR for questioning about her family situation. She tried to explain that moving Mom to assisted living was a loving decision made for Mom's safety, but when HR requested documentation of Mom's cognitive decline or medical necessity for the move, Brielle had nothing to provide. Because there was no cognitive decline, there was no medical necessity. There was only greed disguised as concern. Isabelle, what the hell did you do? Brielle called me that evening, her voice shaking with rage and panic. I reported elder abuse to your employer, I said calmly, which is my legal obligation as a mandated reporter. This isn't elder abuse. We're helping Mom. Really? Then you won't mind explaining to your HR department how forcing a competent senior citizen to surrender her home under false pretenses is helping her. I'm sure they'll be fascinated by your definition of assistance. That's when Brielle realized she'd made an enemy of someone who actually understood elder abuse law. The next morning, I called Celeste's real estate brokerage. This is Isabelle Wright, social worker with the Department of Aging Services. I need to report a potential licensing violation involving one of your agents. What kind of violation? Celeste Patterson has been involved in financially exploiting an elderly family member by pressuring her to surrender valuable property under false pretenses. She's also failed to disclose a conflict of interest in a real estate transaction involving a relative. Real estate agents are required to disclose family relationships in property transactions. They're also prohibited from engaging in practices that exploit vulnerable populations. Celeste had violated both requirements by pressuring Mom to surrender the house without independent legal representation. By afternoon, Celeste was facing a licensing investigation that could suspend her ability to work in real estate. Isabelle, you're destroying our family, Celeste screamed when she called me. No, Celeste, you destroyed our family when you stole Mom's home. I'm just making sure there are consequences for elder abuse. But Felicity was the real target. As a crisis management specialist, she was the smartest of my sisters and the one who'd orchestrated the entire manipulation campaign. So I saved the best for last. I didn't call her employer. Instead, I did something much more devastating. I called her biggest client. Felicity worked for a crisis management firm that represented major corporations during scandals. Her current project was managing the public relations nightmare for a healthcare company that had been accused of overcharging elderly patients for medical equipment. Hi, this is Isabelle Wright from the Department of Aging Services, I told the healthcare company's general counsel. I thought you should know that your crisis management consultant is currently under investigation for elder abuse involving her own family. I'm sorry, what? Felicity Patterson, your PR consultant. She's been exposed for financially exploiting her elderly mother, forcing seniors to surrender their homes under false pretenses, manipulating vulnerable adults, the whole playbook. I thought it might be relevant to your decision-making process, given that you're currently facing elder abuse allegations yourself. Sometimes the most effective weapon is just telling the truth at the right time to the right people. The healthcare company dropped Felicity's firm that afternoon. When your business is managing elder abuse scandals, you can't afford to employ people who abuse elders in their personal lives. Within 48 hours of Mom's eviction, all three of my sisters were facing professional consequences for their personal choices. Brielle was on administrative leave pending an ethics investigation. Celeste was facing a licensing hearing that could end her real estate career. Felicity had lost her biggest client and was scrambling to explain to her firm why their reputation was being damaged by her personal conduct. But I was just getting started. Because professional consequences were only the beginning of what my sisters deserved for stealing from our mother. They'd spent 6 months systematically destroying Mom's confidence and independence. I was going to spend the next 6 months systematically destroying everything they'd built their lives on. They wanted to play family warfare? They'd just declared war on someone who had access to every database, every professional network, and every legal resource necessary to make their lives miserable. And unlike them, I was fighting for justice, not greed, which meant I had all the motivation in the world to see this through to the end. For the next 2 weeks, I watched my sisters scramble to manage the professional crises I'd created, while I planned the next phase of my campaign. They had no idea that their emergency family meeting was being recorded. I'd installed security cameras at Mom's new temporary housing under the pretense of keeping her safe. But the real reason was to document how my sisters treated her when they thought no one was watching. The footage was heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. Brielle visited exactly once, staying for 15 minutes to lecture Mom about adjusting her attitude and being grateful for what we're doing for you. She spent most of the visit on her phone, dealing with her HR crisis. Celeste came by twice, both times to get Mom to sign additional paperwork related to the house sale. She brought legal documents that she didn't explain properly, pressuring Mom to sign quickly, so we can get this process moving for everyone's benefit. Felicity never visited at all. She was too busy managing the fallout from losing her major client and trying to convince her firm that her personal life wouldn't continue affecting their business. But the most damaging footage came from their conversations with each other when they thought Mom couldn't hear. I had audio of Brielle complaining that Mom was being dramatic about leaving her home and needed to get over it because this is happening whether she likes it or not. I had video of Celeste telling a potential buyer that the house would be available once we finished dealing with the previous owner's emotional attachment issues. Most damning, I had recordings of all three sisters discussing how to divide the money before the house had even been listed. But while I was gathering evidence of their ongoing abuse, I was also researching everything I could about their personal and professional lives. Brielle's pharmaceutical company had a social media policy that prohibited employees from posting content that could damage the company's reputation. Her Instagram account was full of photos from expensive vacations, luxury shopping trips, and five-star restaurants, all funded by her six-figure salary pushing drugs to doctors. More problematically, several of her posts included complaints about ungrateful elderly patients and jokes about old people who think they know better than medical professionals. Sometimes people destroy themselves by documenting their own callousness. I compiled screenshots of every post that revealed Brielle's attitude toward elderly people and sent them to her HR department with a note explaining how these views might affect her interactions with elderly patients. For Celeste, I focused on her real estate business practices. Public records showed a pattern of transactions where she'd represented both buyers and sellers without proper disclosure, collected dual commissions, and failed to report conflicts of interest. Her licensing investigation was just the beginning. I filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission about 5 different transactions from the past 2 years, each one documented with public records that showed ethical violations. But Felicity required a more sophisticated approach. As a crisis management specialist, she understood reputation damage better than her sisters. She was already being more careful about her digital footprint and professional associations. So I attacked her where she was most vulnerable, her client relationships. I became her reputation management nightmare by simply telling the truth about who she really was. I created detailed reports documenting Felicity's elder abuse campaign against our mother, complete with timelines, evidence, and professional analysis of manipulation tactics. Then I sent these reports to every potential client her firm was courting. Before you hire Felicity Patterson to manage your crisis communications, the reports began, you should know how she handles family crises in her personal life. The reports detailed how Felicity had orchestrated a 6-month manipulation campaign against a vulnerable senior citizen, used psychological pressure tactics to force property surrender, and demonstrated a pattern of exploiting trust relationships for financial gain. Within a week, 3 potential clients had pulled out of negotiations with Felicity's firm, specifically citing concerns about her character and judgment. But my most effective weapon wasn't professional sabotage or legal consequences. It was social isolation. I began reaching out to friends, neighbors, former colleagues, and community members who knew our family. Not to gossip or spread rumors, but to share the truth about what my sisters had done to our mother. I wanted you to know what happened to Vivian, I'd say during these conversations. Her daughters forced her out of her home so they could sell it and split the money. She's living in senior housing now, not because she needs assistance, but because her own children stole her independence. The response was immediate and devastating for my sisters. Friends stopped returning their calls. Neighbors began treating them with cold politeness instead of warmth. Former colleagues distanced themselves professionally. Church members, book club friends, and community volunteers, all the social connections that had made my sisters feel respected and valued, began to evaporate as word spread about their treatment of our mother. People understood elderly abuse, even when it was committed by family members, especially when it was committed by family members. Because if someone could betray their own mother for money, what would they do to friends, neighbors, or business associates when the stakes were right? My sisters had spent 6 months destroying Mom's sense of security and belonging. Now they were experiencing what it felt like to lose their own community support. But I still wasn't finished, because the best part of my plan was yet to come. The first direct confrontation happened when Brielle showed up at my apartment on a Friday night, 3 weeks after Mom's eviction. She thought she could intimidate me into backing down. I opened the door to find my oldest sister standing in my hallway, dressed in the designer clothes she bought with her pharmaceutical sales commissions. Her face was flushed with anger and desperation. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my living room without being invited. "Of course we do. Come in," I said sarcastically, closing the door behind her. "Isabelle, you need to stop this insanity. You're destroying our careers over something that was done for Mom's own good." I sat down across from her and pulled out my phone, opening the voice recording app. "Please, continue. I'd love to hear more about how stealing our mother's home was for her own good." "I'm not being recorded," Brielle snapped. "Then leave. This is my apartment, and if you want to have this conversation, it's going to be documented." The panic in her eyes told me everything I needed to know about how desperate she'd become. She stayed, which meant she was more afraid of her professional consequences than she was of being recorded. "Look, I'm on administrative leave," she said, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she probably used with difficult doctors. "My company is treating me like a criminal over a family decision. You're ruining my career because you don't understand the bigger picture." "What bigger picture is that, Brielle?" "Mom can't maintain that house forever. She's 65 years old, and eventually she's going to need help. We were being proactive about planning for her future." "By stealing her present?" "We weren't stealing anything. The money from the house sale is going into accounts for Mom's care. She'll have everything she needs for the rest of her life." That's when I knew she'd prepared this lie to tell herself, her employer, and to anyone else who questioned their actions. "Show me the accounts," I said calmly. "What?" Show me the bank accounts where you've deposited mom's money for her care. Show me the trust fund you've established. Show me any legal documentation proving that the proceeds from her house sale are being held for her benefit. Brielle's silence was deafening. You can't show me those accounts because they don't exist, I continued. You plan to split the money 3 ways and spend it on yourselves. That's not elder care planning, that's theft. It's not theft if it's family. Actually, it's exactly theft when it's family. Elder abuse by relatives is still elder abuse, Brielle. The fact that your mom's daughter doesn't give you the right to steal her life savings. She stood up abruptly, pacing to my window. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Celeste has 2 kids heading to college. Felicity's firm is struggling. I've got my own financial responsibilities. And Mom has a right to live in her own home until she chooses otherwise. She's being unreasonable about this. She's too attached to material things. That house is just a building, but the money could help all of us. In that moment, I realized my sister had completely lost the ability to understand right from wrong. That house is where she raised us, where she grieved Dad, where she built a life over 40 years. It's not just a building to her. And the fact that you can't understand that proves you have no business making decisions about her life. We're her daughters too, Isabelle. We have rights. You have the right to earn your own money and solve your own financial problems. You don't have the right to steal hers. Brielle turned to face me, and I saw something desperate and ugly in her expression. If you don't stop sabotaging our careers, I'm going to make sure Mom understands exactly what kind of person you really are. What kind of person is that? The kind who would destroy her own family to prove a point. The kind who cares more about being right than about family unity. I stood up, matching her aggressive posture. Brielle, you forced our 65-year-old mother out of her home so you could steal her money. I'm not destroying our family. You already did that. We were trying to help. Stop lying. To me, to yourself, to your employer. You weren't helping anyone but yourselves. She stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if threats or manipulation would be more effective. You know what? Fine. Keep playing the hero. But when Mom realizes that you're the reason her daughters can't visit her anymore because we've all lost our jobs, she'll understand who really hurt this family. Mom won't lose her daughters because you lost your jobs. She lost her daughters the day you decided money was more important than her dignity. After Brielle left, I sat in my living room listening to the recording of our conversation, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Sadness. Not regret for what I was doing to my sisters, but grief for who they'd become. The women who'd raised me, protected me, and taught me about family loyalty had turned into strangers willing to abuse an elderly woman for financial gain. But my sadness didn't change my resolve. If anything, it strengthened it. Because if I didn't hold them accountable for what they'd done to Mom, who would? 2 weeks after Brielle's visit, the full scope of my sister's deception began to unravel in ways even I hadn't anticipated. The truth had a way of revealing itself once people started asking the right questions. It started when Mom's longtime neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, called me with information that changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. Isabelle, I need to tell you something about what happened before your mother was moved, she said during a phone call that made my blood run cold. Your sisters came to see me 3 months ago. What did they want? They asked me to corroborate stories about your mother's declining mental health. They wanted me to sign a statement saying I'd observed her confusion, memory problems, and inability to maintain her property. My sisters hadn't just manipulated Mom, they'd tried to manufacture evidence of incompetence. Mrs. Henderson continued. They offered to pay me for my cooperation. When I refused and told them your mother was as sharp as ever, they suggested I was too old to be a reliable witness. This wasn't just elder abuse anymore. This was conspiracy to commit fraud with attempted witness tampering. I drove to Mrs. Henderson's house that afternoon with a digital recorder and my professional documentation materials. What she told me during our 2-hour conversation provided evidence of criminal behavior that went far beyond family manipulation. Brielle brought official-looking forms, Mrs. Henderson explained. She said they needed neighbor testimony to complete the paperwork for your mother's care facility placement. But when I read the forms carefully, they were actually competency declarations. What kind of competency declarations? Legal documents stating that Vivian was no longer capable of managing her affairs, making financial decisions, or living independently. Brielle wanted me to sign papers that would have given your sisters legal power of attorney. They'd been planning to have Mom declared incompetent so they could steal everything she owned. The more Mrs. Henderson explained, the more horrified I became. My sisters hadn't just wanted the house, they'd wanted complete control over Mom's finances, medical decisions, and living arrangements. The assisted living placement was meant to be permanent, with Mom's bank accounts, pension, and Social Security all controlled by her daughters. If their plan had worked, Mom would have been trapped in senior housing with no access to her own money, no control over her medical care, and no legal recourse to regain her independence. It was a comprehensive theft of autonomy disguised as loving concern. I spent the next week interviewing other neighbors, family friends, and community members. What I discovered was a systematic campaign to build a case for Mom's incompetence using fabricated evidence and coerced testimony. My sisters had approached Mom's doctor asking leading questions about age-related cognitive decline. They'd contacted her bank expressing concern about unusual spending patterns that didn't actually exist. They'd spoken to her insurance company about safety issues in the home that were entirely fictional. Each contact was designed to create a paper trail suggesting Mom was becoming incapable of independent living. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source: Celeste's own files. Sometimes criminals are undone by their own meticulous record-keeping. During my professional investigation training, I'd learned that real estate agents keep detailed files of all transactions, including preliminary paperwork and communication records. When Celeste's real estate license came under review, the state board requested her complete files for the past 2 years. Those files included documents related to Mom's house that revealed the full scope of their planning. Celeste had been researching the property value and market conditions for 8 months before Mom's eviction. She'd prepared listing documents, commission calculations, and distribution agreements dividing the proceeds 3 ways between herself, Brielle, and Felicity. She'd also kept copies of the falsified competency declarations, neighbor contact lists, and strategic planning documents outlining their timeline for gaining control of Mom's assets. Most damning, she'd kept text message screenshots between the 3 sisters discussing their inheritance advance and how to neutralize Mom's resistance to the transition. The state real estate board forwarded these files to the district attorney's office as evidence of potential elder abuse and fraud. Within days, all 3 of my sisters received notification that they were under criminal investigation for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, attempted fraud, and violation of vulnerable adult protection statutes. But the revelation that shocked me most came from Mom herself. I knew what they were doing, she told me during one of our weekly dinners at her new place. I could see them planning something, but I didn't want to believe my own daughters would steal from me. Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I wanted to believe they still loved me more than they loved money. My mother had been protecting my sisters even while they were abusing her. I've been recording our conversations too, she admitted. I have audio of them discussing the house sale, the money distribution, and their plans to have me declared incompetent. I was gathering evidence in case I needed to defend myself legally. My 65-year-old mother had been conducting her own investigation while being victimized by her own daughters. She'd been fighting back in the only way she could, by documenting the truth about what was being done to her. The woman my sisters thought was too old and confused to protect herself had been building a case against them the entire time. And now that case was in the hands of prosecutors who specialized in elder abuse crimes. My sisters had wanted to steal Mom's independence and autonomy. Instead, they'd created evidence that could send them to prison. Justice was no longer just a family matter. It was a criminal matter. And there was no amount of manipulation, lies, or fake concern that could save them now. The criminal investigation changed everything about my approach to protecting Mom and holding my sisters accountable. I went from being an angry daughter to being a professional witness in a felony case. When Detective Sarah Martinez from the Elder Abuse Unit contacted me, I realized that my documentation efforts had created exactly the kind of evidence prosecutors need to build solid cases against family members who exploit elderly relatives. Ms. Wright, your sister's real estate files contain some of the most detailed evidence of premeditated elder abuse I've seen in 15 years. Detective Martinez told me during our first interview. Most elder abuse cases rely on victim testimony and circumstantial evidence. This case has documentation, witness statements, and recorded conversations spanning 8 months. I turned over everything I'd gathered: the security camera footage from Mom's housing, the recordings of my sister's visits, the documentation of their professional misconduct, and all the evidence Mrs. Henderson and other neighbors had provided. But the most powerful evidence came from Mom's own recordings. Mom had been more strategic in her documentation than I'd realized. She'd recorded not just recent conversations about the house sale, but months of earlier discussions where my sisters had discussed their financial problems and their view of Mom's assets as family money they deserved access to. They never thought I understood what they were talking about, Mom explained to Detective Martinez. They'd have these conversations right in front of me, as if I wasn't there or couldn't comprehend what they meant. The recordings revealed that this hadn't been a sudden decision triggered by financial crisis. It had been a long-term plan developed over years of gradually shifting from seeing Mom as a person to seeing her as an obstacle to wealth they felt entitled to inherit. My sisters had documented their own criminal intent in conversations with their victim. While the criminal investigation proceeded, I focused on helping Mom rebuild her life and her confidence. The first step was getting her out of the assisted living facility and into housing that reflected her actual needs and preferences rather than her daughter's manipulation campaign. I helped Mom apply for senior housing that was closer to our old neighborhood, with amenities that matched her interests and activity level. The new place had a library, a piano, and a garden where she could continue the hobbies that made her feel like herself. More importantly, it was housing she chose, not housing she was forced into by family members with ulterior motives. We also worked on rebuilding the social connections my sisters had tried to sever. Mom began reaching out to friends and former colleagues who'd been told she was declining and needed space to adjust to her new situation. Many of these friends were horrified to learn what had actually happened and immediately rallied to support Mom through the legal process and emotional recovery. But the hardest part of Mom's recovery wasn't practical, it was psychological. "I keep questioning my own judgment," she told me during one of our weekly visits. "If I couldn't see what my own daughters were planning, how can I trust myself to make important decisions?" This is the psychological damage that elder abuse creates. Victims begin to doubt their own competence because their abusers have spent months or years undermining their confidence and autonomy. "Mom, you did see what they were planning. That's why you started recording their conversations. Your judgment was perfect. You just hoped you were wrong because you loved them." The criminal investigation also revealed information about my sister's financial situations that explained, but didn't excuse, their behavior. Brielle was carrying significant credit card debt from her luxury lifestyle, despite her six-figure salary. Her expensive vacations and designer purchases had created financial pressure that made Mom's house equity look like a solution to her money management problems. Celeste's real estate business was struggling due to market changes and her questionable ethics. She'd lost several clients due to conflicts of interest and was facing potential lawsuits from previous transactions. Mom's house sale would have provided a financial cushion during her professional difficulties. Felicity's crisis management firm was indeed struggling, partly because of her own poor professional judgment. She'd lost clients due to her aggressive tactics and reputation for prioritizing spin over substance. The healthcare company that dropped her after learning about the elder abuse was just the latest in a series of professional failures. But financial pressure doesn't justify elder abuse any more than gambling debts justify bank robbery. My sisters had chosen crime over legitimate solutions to their money problems. All three of them could have addressed their financial issues through legal means: budgeting, debt consolidation, career changes, or simply living within their means. Instead, they'd chosen to steal from an elderly family member who'd spent her entire life providing for them. As the investigation continued, I found myself processing complex emotions about justice, family, and forgiveness. I wasn't sorry for reporting their crimes or for ensuring they faced consequences, but I was grieving the loss of the relationships I'd thought we had, the sisters I'd thought they were, and the family I'd believed we could always be. The women being prosecuted for elder abuse weren't strangers who'd targeted a vulnerable senior citizen. They were my sisters, who'd targeting our mother. And that made their crimes both more personal and more unforgivable. Because family members who abuse elderly relatives don't just steal money or property, they steal trust, security, and the fundamental belief that family means protection rather than exploitation. My sisters had taught our mother that her own children could become her predators, and that lesson could never be completely unlearned. 6 months after the criminal investigation began, I watched my sisters' lives systematically collapse in ways that had nothing to do with my intervention. Sometimes justice looks like natural consequences, finally catching up with people who've been avoiding accountability for years. Brielle was terminated from her pharmaceutical sales position after the company completed their ethics investigation. But her firing wasn't just about the elder abuse. It was about a pattern of questionable conduct they'd discovered during their review of her employment history. HR had found evidence that she'd been falsifying client visit reports, claiming educational meetings with doctors that never happened, and padding her expense accounts with personal purchases disguised as business costs. The elder abuse investigation had prompted a deeper look at her professional behavior, revealing that someone willing to defraud family members was also willing to defraud employers. The same character flaws that made her abuse our mother made her a liability in every area of her life. Celeste lost her real estate license permanently after the state board discovered a pattern of ethical violations spanning 5 years. The investigation into Mom's case had revealed systematic fraud, dual representation without disclosure, undisclosed family relationships and transactions, and misappropriation of client funds. But the most damaging discovery was that Celeste had been stealing from escrow accounts, using client funds to cover personal expenses with the intention of replacing the money before closing dates. She'd been running a Ponzi scheme with real estate transactions, stealing from one client to repay another, and the elder abuse case had exposed the entire operation. Celeste hadn't just targeted our mother, she'd been preying on vulnerable clients for years. Felicity's crisis management firm collapsed entirely after 3 major clients pulled their contracts following the elder abuse revelations. But the business failure wasn't just about reputation damage, it was about the fundamental dishonesty that had always characterized her work. During the elder abuse investigation, prosecutors had subpoenaed Felicity's business records as evidence of her character and pattern of behavior. Those records revealed that her crisis management often involved covering up client misconduct, intimidating witnesses, and creating false narratives to deflect accountability. Several former clients were now facing their own legal challenges as the truth about Felicity's methods came to light. While my sisters' professional lives imploded, Mom was thriving in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. Her new housing situation had introduced her to a community of active seniors who shared her interests in literature, music, and volunteer work. She'd joined a book club, started playing piano for community events, and began tutoring adult literacy students. I forgot how much I enjoyed meeting new people, she told me during one of our weekly dinners. Your sisters had me believing I was too old to make friends or try new things. Mom was discovering that her daughters had been holding her back from growth and independence, not protecting her from decline. The criminal case against my sisters was proceeding steadily toward trial. The district attorney's office had offered plea bargains that included restitution, community service, and probation, but all three sisters had rejected the offers on the advice of their attorneys. They were still maintaining that they'd been acting in Mom's best interest, despite the overwhelming evidence of premeditation and financial motivation. But the most revealing aspect of this entire experience was how my sisters responded to consequences. Instead of acknowledging wrongdoing, accepting responsibility, or expressing remorse for the harm they'd caused, they doubled down on their victim narrative. Brielle claimed she was being persecuted for caring too much about family. Celeste insisted that the real estate investigation was retaliation for her family involvement. Felicity argued that her business failures were the result of character assassination, rather than consequences for her actions. None of them had visited Mom since the criminal investigation began. None of them had apologized for the trauma they'd caused. None of them had offered to make financial restitution for the costs of legal representation and housing transition. They were more concerned about their own reputations than about the elderly mother they'd claimed to be protecting. Their response to accountability revealed who they'd always been underneath the facade of loving daughters. During this period, I also learned something important about my own motivations and methods. My initial desire for revenge had evolved into something more complex, a commitment to justice that extended beyond our family situation. Working with Detective Martinez and the Elder Abuse Unit had shown me how common family-based financial exploitation is, and how rarely it's reported or prosecuted effectively. I decided to transition from general social work to specializing exclusively in elder abuse investigation and prevention. Mom's case had taught me that the best way to honor victims of family abuse is to prevent other families from experiencing the same trauma. I'm proud of you for protecting me, Mom said when I told her about my career change. But I'm even prouder that you're going to protect other people's mothers. The criminal trial was scheduled for the following spring, almost exactly 1 year after my sisters had evicted Mom from her home. By then, all three of them would be facing not just criminal charges, but complete professional and personal ruin that they'd created through their own choices and character flaws. They'd wanted quick access to inheritance money. Instead, they'd destroyed their earning capacity and faced years of legal debt. They'd wanted to control Mom's life and assets. Instead, they'd lost all influence over family decisions and been cut off from family relationships. They'd wanted to avoid responsibility for their financial problems. Instead, they'd created criminal liability that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Sometimes, justice doesn't require intervention. Sometimes justice is just letting people experience the natural consequences of treating others as disposable. The final confrontation happened the day before the criminal trial was scheduled to begin, when all three of my sisters showed up at Mom's apartment building unannounced. They'd come to make one last attempt at manipulation before facing a jury. I was visiting Mom for our weekly dinner when the building's security guard called to say that three women claiming to be family were demanding access to the building. "Do you want to see them?" I asked Mom. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where she'd been volunteering. "Yes, I think it's time we all face the truth about what this family has become." The security guard escorted Brielle, Celeste, and Felicity to Mom's apartment. They looked exactly like what they were. three middle-aged women whose lives had been destroyed by their own greed and poor judgment. Brielle had lost weight and looked haggard from months of unemployment stress. Celeste was dressed in clothes that showed her financial decline since losing her real estate career. Felicity had the desperate energy of someone whose professional reputation was completely ruined. The composed, successful sisters who'd evicted Mom a year ago had been replaced by broken women facing criminal conviction. "Mom, we need to talk," Brielle said as they entered the apartment. "This has gone too far." "You're right," Mom said calmly. "It went too far the day you forced me out of my home." "We never forced you to do anything," Celeste protested. "We were trying to help you plan for your future." "By stealing my present?" The conversation that followed was like watching three desperate people try to rewrite history while their victim held up evidence of their lies. "Mom, you have to drop the criminal charges," Felicity said, cutting straight to their real purpose. "You're destroying your own daughters over a misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding is that?" "We never intended to steal anything from you. The money from the house sale was always going to be used for your care." Even facing prison, they were still lying to our mother's face. "Show me the trust fund," I said, pulling out my phone to record the conversation. "Show me any bank account with Mom's money that's been set aside for her care." "We haven't set it up yet because of all this legal drama." "You haven't set it up because you never intended to. You planned to split the money 3 ways and spend it on yourselves." "That's not true," Brielle said, but her voice lacked any conviction. Mom stood up and walked to her bookshelf, pulling out a folder that contained copies of all the evidence that would be presented at trial. "Celeste, would you like to explain this document?" she asked, handing over a copy of the real estate file that showed the 3-way division of proceeds. "Or Felicity, perhaps you can explain this recording where you discuss my resistance to the transition and how to neutralize my attachment to my home. Or Brielle, maybe you can explain why you offered to pay neighbors to sign false statements about my mental competence." My mother had become a prosecutor presenting evidence to defendants who'd been caught red-handed. The 3 sisters looked at each other with the kind of panic that comes when people realize their lies have been completely exposed. "Mom, we're family," Celeste said, her voice breaking. "Families forgive each other. Families work things out together." "You're right," Mom said. "Families do forgive each other. Families do work things out together. Families protect each other and care for each other's welfare." She paused, looking at each of her daughters with the kind of sadness that comes from profound disappointment. "But you stopped being family the day you decided I was an obstacle to money you felt entitled to inherit." "We're still your daughters," Felicity protested. "No, you're 3 middle-aged women who committed crimes against an elderly family member. The daughters I raised would never have stolen from someone they loved." That's when my sisters finally understood that their mother was no longer the vulnerable victim they'd been manipulating. "If you drop the charges, we'll pay back every penny," Brielle said desperately. "With what money? You've all lost your careers because of your own poor choices and character flaws. We'll figure something out. We'll get new jobs. We'll make payment plans." "Brielle, you can't get a new job in pharmaceutical sales because no company will hire someone with an elder abuse conviction. Celeste, you can't work in real estate because your license has been permanently revoked. Felicity, you can't work in crisis management because you've become the crisis that can't be managed." The room fell silent as the reality of their situation settled over them. "The trial starts tomorrow," Mom continued. "You can plead guilty and accept responsibility for what you've done, or you can continue lying and face the maximum sentences. But either way, you're going to experience consequences for your actions." "And what about us?" Celeste asked. "What about your relationship with your daughters?" "I don't have daughters," Mom said quietly. "I have 3 criminals who used to be my children." As they left that day, I realized that the confrontation hadn't been about reconciliation or forgiveness. It had been about my mother finally speaking her truth to the people who'd tried to steal her voice. The women who'd thought they could manipulate a vulnerable senior citizen had discovered that their victim was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than they'd ever imagined. And tomorrow, a jury would decide how much accountability they deserved for underestimating her. The jury took less than 4 hours to find all three of my sisters guilty on multiple counts of elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Justice looked like three women in handcuffs being led away from a courtroom where their mother had testified against them. Brielle received 18 months in prison plus 5 years of probation. Celeste got 2 years in prison plus restitution requirements that will take decades to fulfill. Felicity received the harshest sentence, 3 years in prison plus community service specifically focused on elder abuse prevention. The judge said their sentences reflected not just the crimes they'd committed, but the particular cruelty of victimizing a family member who'd spent her life providing for them. But the most important verdict didn't come from the jury. It came from our mother. After the sentencing, Mom and I sat in the courthouse parking lot, processing the end of a legal journey that had lasted over a year. "Do you regret testifying against them?" I asked. "No," she said without hesitation. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they became people who could do this to someone they claim to love. But I don't regret holding them accountable for their choices." My mother had learned that protecting yourself from family abuse requires the same courage as protecting yourself from strangers. In the 18 months since this began, Mom has built a life that's richer and more fulfilling than anything she'd experienced while being manipulated by her daughters. She's traveled to places she'd always wanted to see, but had been told she was too old to enjoy. She's developed friendships with people who value her wisdom and experience rather than her financial assets. She's volunteered with organizations that help other elder abuse victims navigate the legal and emotional recovery process. Most importantly, she's learned to trust her own judgment again. "I spent so many years letting them convince me that my opinions didn't matter," she told me recently. "I forgot that I'd successfully raised 4 children, managed a household on a teacher's salary, and survived decades of challenges. Their manipulation made me doubt abilities I'd proven over and over again." My career transition to elder abuse investigation has shown me how common family-based financial exploitation is and how devastating it can be for victims who've lost trust in their own decision-making abilities. But it's also shown me that recovery is possible when victims receive support, validation, and justice. I've worked on dozens of cases now where adult children have stolen from elderly parents, and the patterns are always the same: manufactured concerns about competence, pressure to make practical decisions about assets, and manipulation disguised as loving care. The weapons are always psychological, making victims doubt their abilities, isolating them from independent support systems, and creating false emergencies that require immediate financial decisions. But the most effective defense against elder abuse is also psychological. Maintaining strong social connections, trusting your own judgment, and understanding that family members who truly love you will respect your autonomy rather than trying to control your choices. If you're an older adult reading this and you recognize manipulation tactics being used against you, please know that you're not alone and you're not powerless. Document concerning behavior, maintain relationships with people outside your family, and don't hesitate to contact elder abuse hotlines if you feel pressured to make decisions you're not comfortable with. If you're an adult child concerned about an elderly parent's welfare, remember that genuine care looks like supporting their independence, not taking control of their lives. If you're worried about your parents' safety or decision-making abilities, involve them in conversations about their concerns and preferences rather than making unilateral decisions about their future. And if you're watching this because you suspect family members are abusing an elderly relative, Understand that elder abuse is a crime, not a family matter. Reporting it isn't betraying your family. It's protecting someone who deserves safety and dignity, regardless of their age. My sisters spent years convincing themselves that stealing from our mother was an act of love and protection. But love doesn't involve taking away someone's choices. Protection doesn't require eliminating someone's independence. And family loyalty means supporting each other's well-being, not exploiting each other's vulnerabilities. The three women who were sentenced today were my sisters, but they stopped being family the moment they decided our mother's value was measured by her assets rather than her humanity. True family members protect each other. They don't prey on each other. And when family members become predators, the most loving thing you can do is ensure they face consequences for their actions. Because accountability isn't the opposite of family loyalty, it's the foundation of it. Have you ever had to protect an elderly family member from other relatives? Share your story in the comments below. Every story helps someone else recognize the warning signs of elder abuse. Subscribe for more stories about family justice and protecting vulnerable adults. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is hold your own family accountable.